Hello, family. Settle in, because today's story is brought to you by GB News's favorite pastime, finding yet another way to circle back to Meghan Sussex and pretend it's journalism. The headline reads, Meghan Markle's father turns to crowdfunding after leg amputation abroad. And immediately, the implication is clear. The unspoken message is loud. The framing is deliberate. This isn't just about a medical situation. This is about, once again, positioning Meghan Sussex as the silent villain in a story the British media has been dining out on for years. Before we go any further, let's ask the question that GB News, the Daily Mail, and their usual choir of commentators are desperately hoping nobody asks. Where did all the money go? Because Thomas Markle did not suddenly appear as a private citizen unfamiliar with media attention. He didn't wake up one day having never spoken publicly about his daughter. This is a man who, for years, has actively collaborated with British tabloids, talk shows, and broadcasters that are openly hostile toward Meghan Sussex. This wasn't accidental. It wasn't coerced. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was consistent. Thomas Markle gave interview after interview. He sold access. He sold commentary. He sold personal family details. He sat on panels. He recorded statements. He repeated narratives that were guaranteed to generate headlines and paychecks. And who was paying? The same British media ecosystem that now wants to look concerned and confused about why crowdfunding is even necessary. Let's not rewrite history. The UK tabloid press didn't just report on Thomas Markle. They elevated him. They rewarded him. They platformed him. They encouraged him. They turned him into a recurring character in their long-running anti-Meghan storyline. They squeezed every ounce of usable content out of him. And now that the situation is no longer as profitable, they're stepping back, shrugging, and quietly shifting the focus back to Meghan Sussex. Convenient. GB News reports, almost as an aside, that Meghan wrote her father a private letter following his surgery. Private. No press conference, no social media post, no televised statement, no monetized grief. And that alone should stop the narrative in its tracks. But instead, it's glossed over because it doesn't fit the caricature they've spent years selling. If Meghan Sussex were truly the cold, uncaring figure they insist she is, there would have been no letter. There would have been no outreach at all, especially after years of public betrayal and boundary violations. But there it is. Quiet, human, unadvertised. And still, it's not enough. Because the expectation from the British media is not decency, it's performance. They want her to do it loudly, publicly, on their terms, for their benefit. Let's be very clear about something that often gets conveniently ignored. Adult children are not obligated to financially support parents who have repeatedly sold them out to hostile media. That is not cruelty. That is reality. Thomas Markle did not simply speak to the press once and regret it. He repeatedly chose platforms that attacked Meghan's character, questioned her motives, undermined her marriage, and fed into some of the ugliest narratives about her. And he did so while knowing exactly how those outlets operate. This was not ignorance. This was participation. Now, when the money isn't flowing the way it once did, we're suddenly meant to forget the context. We're meant to view this as an isolated tragedy disconnected from years of media collaboration and financial benefit. It doesn't work like that. And GB News pretending to be baffled is especially rich, considering their own role in amplifying these stories. This is the same network that routinely hosts commentators whose entire brand revolves around criticizing Meghan Sussex. They built content around it. They attracted viewers with it. They generated advertising revenue with it. And now, not a single segment asking whether those same outlets should take responsibility. No on-air fundraiser, no calls for the media industry to step in and help someone they profited from for years. Just silence. Instead, the implication hangs in the air. Meghan should do something. Why? because she's the easiest target, because she doesn't respond, because she doesn't clap back publicly, because she refuses to play the game. And that refusal drives them absolutely mad. Let's also talk about the selective empathy at play here. When Thomas Markle was actively selling stories about his daughter, there was no concern for family healing, there were no calls for privacy, there was no outrage over exploitation. But now, when the story shifts, suddenly the language becomes sympathetic. Now it's about compassion. Now it's about responsibility. Funny how that only seems to activate when Meghan can be blamed for not performing it publicly. And let's not forget, Thomas Markle has never met his grandchildren. That fact is often weaponized against Meghan, but rarely examined honestly. You do not get unlimited access to someone's children after repeatedly violating trust. You do not get to undermine someone publicly and still expect private access on demand. Boundaries exist for a reason. And Meghan Sussex has spent years enforcing them, quietly, consistently, and without fanfare. That's why this story isn't really about health. It's about resentment. It's about a media industry that lost control of its favorite target and still hasn't recovered. They want reaction. They want spectacle. They want her to break her silence so they can dissect every word. And when she doesn't, they run headlines like this. Let's say it plainly. Meghan Sussex is not responsible for funding the consequences of a media system that spent years profiting against her. If Thomas Markle needs support, perhaps the first place to look is the very institutions that encouraged his public grievances, paid for his appearances, and turned his family conflict into content. Those outlets didn't just observe the situation, they benefited from it. And now they want to wash their hands of it while still using the story to generate clicks. That's not concern, that's convenience. The British media loves to talk about accountability when it comes to Meghan. They demand explanations, apologies, and transparency from her at every turn. But when it comes to their own role in family estrangement, suddenly accountability becomes optional. This is not a tragedy without context. This is a story with a long paper trail. And no amount of sympathetic framing can erase years of public collaboration, paid interviews, and repeated boundary crossings. Meghan Sussex chose peace. She chose privacy. She chose not to monetize family pain. And for that, the British media will never forgive her. Because silence is the one thing they can't control. So the next time you see a headline like this, ask yourself who benefited before, who is silent now, and why the responsibility always seems to land on the same woman. This isn't journalism. It's recycling old grudges for new clicks. And people are finally starting to notice. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more Sussex Update.